भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। ओम नमो ब्रह्मादिभ्यो ब्रह्म विद्या संप्रदाय कर्तृभ्यो वंश ऋषिभ्यो महद्भ्यो नमो गुरुभ्यः। सर्वोपप्लवरहितः प्रज्ञानघनः प्रत्यगर्थो ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि। ओम शांति शांति शांति। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानामालयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं। शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः स्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः। स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु। ओम शांति शांति शांति। We'll just chant the first mantra. Om Brahma Devanam Prathamas Sambhabhuva. Brahma Devanam Prathamas Sambhabhuva. Vishwasya Karta Bhuvanasya Gopta. Vishwasya Karta Bhuvanasya Gopta. Sabrahma Vidyam Sarva Vidya Pratishtham. Sabrahma Vidyam Sarva Vidya Pratishtham. अथर्वाय ज्येष्ठपुत्राय प्राह अथर्वाय ज्येष्ठपुत्राय प्राह. Okay. Now, then there is a second mantra. We will go into that. Last time we saw to it that Brahmaji taught this Vidya to his eldest son, that is called Atharva. Then Atharva continues to teach his disciple. And in those days, the tradition was, we have two kinds of teaching tradition. Guru Shishya Parampara. One is called Guru Shishya Parampara, another one is called Pita Putra Parampara. Father and son, and Guru, teacher, and the disciple. Traditionally, all our Vidyas have survived because of Pita Putra Parampara. When we say Rishi Runam, that is, whatever Vidya one is given by one's own father, one has to pass on to his or her own son. That's why when they greet, they chant this, I belong to this Shakha, this Veda, etc. These Vedas and Veda mantras and Shakhas are so far protected by every father-son generation. Even today in India, some professions do not have formal educational infrastructure or system available to teach. They are taught by Pita Putra Parampara only. Even this medical science was one of them, where a Vaidya will teach his son, and the son will teach to his son, etc. And now also this carpentry, masonry, ironsmithery, etc. in the villages or university, we don't have any carpentry colleges. We don't have any goldsmithery colleges. There are certain colleges for goldsmiths now, but that are designing colleges. Now our Rajkot son, these goldsmiths have gone to Dubai. They are controlling Dubai market. And so they have created, Dubai is a filthy rich place, so they need new fashion. So they have created a design training course, but not ornament making. ऐसे भी बढ़ावा ही नहीं, घाल घूसड़ કેટલી કરવી તો બાપ પાસે શીખવું પડે. How much mixing is to be done? There has to be learned from the father only. So traditionally, certain professions, even masonry, there are masons, very expert masons, but they learn from them. Even architect, especially temple architect, that whom we call it Sompuras, the one who is building Ram Mandir. They are all traditional people. Father teaches the son. That's how Vidyas were protected. These three runam which a grahasti needs to fulfill is, one of them is Rishi runam. Rishi runam means the body of the knowledge that you happen to inherit from your ancestors. You need to pass it on to your children and generation next. And that's how this knowledge was passed on. So also that parampara is talked about. So now please see that next mantra that is continues here further, and then he can they tell what is there. I have to get the mantra. Hold on. I am somewhere out of the town, and I never thought I would take this. There it is. There it is. Now let us chant the mantra. अथर्वणेयां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा अथर्वणेयां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा अथर्वातां पुरोवाच अंगिरे ब्रह्म विद्याम् अथर्वातं पुरोवाच अंगिरे ब्रह्म विद्याम् सभारद्वाजाय सत्यवहाय प्राह भारद्वाजो अंगिरसे परावराम भारद्वाजो अंगिरसे परावराम अथर्वणेयां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा अथर्वणेयां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा अथर्वातां पुरोवाच अंगिरे ब्रह्म विद्याम् अथर्वातां पुरोवाच अंगिरे ब्रह्म विद्याम् सभारद्वाजाय सत्यवहाय प्राह सभारद्वाजाय सत्यवहाय प्राह भारद्वाजो अंगिरसे परावराम भारद्वाजो अंगिरसे परावराम. That Brahma Vidya, Tam Brahma Vidya, that Brahma Vidya which was taught by Brahmaji to Atharva, what happened Atharvane unto Atharva, that Brahma Vidya Yam Pravaved Brahma, that Brahmaji who taught that Brahma Vidya to Atharva, that Atharva Puraha in the past, Uvacha Angire, he taught it to Angiras, the name of the Rishi. Atharva Rishi taught Angira Rishi in those days. Saha means that Angira Rishi, Bharadwajaya Satyavahaya Praha. He told to Rishi called named Satyavaha, who belonged to Bharadwaja Gotra, and that Satyavaha, who belonged to Bharadwaja Gotra, Sabharadwaja Angirase. There were two Rishi, Angira and Angiras. So, Atharva taught Angira. Angira taught Satyavaha. And Satyavaha taught Angirasa. And that, what is that? That who, Paravara, who comes from elder to younger, or to Guru to Shishya, that Vidya. Okay, these are just the names of the Rishis who learned this Vidya. For us, it may seem little irrelevant, but if you know Vedas, you may know what contribution these Rishis have made for Vedic knowledge. They were great Rishis who were mantra drashtaraha. So many mantras are attributed to this Angira, as well as Satyavaha, as well as Angirasa. There is a tradition that either in the beginning of teaching or when you conclude the teaching, you talk about the tradition of teaching, who all learned this. In Bhagavad Gita also, Bhagavan mentions this, I taught this Brahma Vidya Purovacha. I taught this to Manu Ikshvake Prava Ikshvaku Manave Praha Manu Vivasvate Praha Imam Rajarshayo Vidu, etc. It is not for the sake of storytelling, and it is not for the sake of just history. These details are given. These details are given to tell us that so many great rishis also studied. That means this knowledge is something which needs to be imbibed by all of us. This Vidya is something that even such great rishis felt the need to learn this. There is a beautiful story about this Upanishad, Yamaraja Nachiketa dialogue. Nachiketa was bestowed 3 boons. He said, I wanted this, and he said, he asked any 3 boons. So he took the first 2 boons. First one where he asked the peace of the mind of his parents. Second, he asked the way to go to heaven. And the third, he asked for this Vidya. Please give me this knowledge. Then Yamaraja tells, Devai Ratravi Vichikitsitam Pura Nahi Suvigneya Ranuresha Dharma Anyam Varam Nachiketo Vranishva Mamo Parotsi Ratima Sujena. Oh Nachiketas, you ask some other boon. Don't press me. I am bound by my words. You have right to ask for whatever you wish. And since I have said this, I have to fulfill your wish. But I request you to give up this. Ask something else for this 3rd boon. He says, why should I give up? He says, Devaihi atra vichikitsitam pura. Even Devatas had asked about this Vidya. Devatas also had raised question to Brahmaji about this Vidya, and they had gone all the way to Brahmaji to learn this. So please don't ask. And it is very subtle and very difficult. That boy, Nachiketa, it is mentioned in Veda, was between 9 to 12. He said, Devatas with all heavenly pleasure felt the need for this. He says, yes. Then why not I? That's why I want it. So even the heavenly pleasures are insufficient to give self-contentment. Heavenly pleasures are falling short of creating a sense of self-satisfaction, self-contentment. That itself shows that these pleasures are futile. I don't want that. Nanyam varam nachiketo vrunit. I don't want anything. You please give me that. That is so true. Even Naradji goes to Sanat Kumaras and tells, Soham Bhagavat Socham. He was grieving. And he says, I want this. In one word, Narada was one with much more than a diplomatic passport for all countries. Diplomatic passport gives you entry without security and all that in a given country. But Narada could go to straight to president of the country. In Vaikuntha Loka, he can go to Narayana. In Kailasa, he can go to Shiva. In Brahmaloka, he can go to Brahmaji. And not only go to presidential palace, but he can go to president's bedroom also. He had such an access. Even that Narada, he says, Soham, that I. And he enumerates his achievements. He enumerates his wisdom. He enumerates his success. Still, I am not satisfied. Therefore, I want this Vidya. So, the tradition is given to emphasize proper value, emphasize proper attitude to learn. Of course, this we will see in the later part of this Upanishad. To study this, you need certain maturity. You see, two things are there. Of the four Purushartha, Artha Kama are natural. Dharma and Moksha Purushartha, one has to initiate. Nobody needs to initiate Kama Purushartha. No one needs to initiate Artha Purushartha. That each living sentient creature would seek and work for these Purusharthas on its own. But Dharma, one has to deliberately pursue. It requires a will to pursue Dharma, a commitment to pursue Dharma. And Moksha, you don't need even a will. It is not something you can pursue by will. This is something you have to grow. You have to have maturity. One needs to be so introvert to himself or herself to some extent. One needs to question oneself as to this much clarity as to what am I seeking in the life and what have I achieved so far. In corporate jargon, one needs to have one's own life balance sheet. Needs to have inner space. Otherwise, human beings are nowadays more so. They are so preoccupied with a target-oriented life, with the goal and the focus on some external achievement. By the time they achieve something, they never own up their own success. They never live their success. And there is something else they want to jump to. So mind is so preoccupied that there is no self-analysis, self-introspection, self-judgment, nothing. And that maturity should come. Hey, what I have been seeking in the life and what I have achieved has no connection. What you want ultimately and what you have gained so far has absolutely no connection. In one word, all a human heart wants is total happiness, total contentment. I want to see myself as a complete person. That is what each one wants. The definition of being complete keeps changing. But then, maybe subjective also. But then I want to see myself all the time as a complete person. I want to be acceptable in my own vision. There is a problem of non-self acceptance. There is a problem of self-discontentment. So sometimes there is a self-loathe that gives them guilt and hurts and all kinds of problems, psychological problems. That discontentment is so much that each one feels. They don't say this openly, but they tell us, Swamiji, do something. I am a very unlucky person. I said, no, there is at least one more person who is unlucky. He said, who is that? The one who got married to you is more unlucky than you. If you are most unlucky, that person should be idiot enough to marry you. That he or she decides to marry the most unlucky person, that person should be more unlucky. There is always a grumbling self, complaining self. And that comes out in the temple also. That dissatisfaction, that feeling that my destiny did not favor me, my stars did not favor me, and I didn't get what I deserved, that everyone feels this. That clarity, okay, this is the problem of life. There may be a given problem of having something or not having something. But even if that problem of haves and have-nots are solved, the sense of discontentment, sense of dissatisfaction centered on me, I the person, never goes. Penniless also discontent, and with a crores of rupees also discontent. Position without position discontent, with position also discontent. With name and fame, without name and fame, discontent. It is always there. That when one discerns this, then only the pursuit for moksha begins. You cannot decide to pursue moksha. One may decide, but the words or the teaching can work only when one has discerned the fundamental problem. So these big names, they are not just names are thrown here to glorify the Vidya. It is told to tell us, in spite of all this achievement, these great people felt the lacuna. They needed this Vidya. So better you pursue. You see that I need to pursue. You know, whether you all know this Atharva and Angirasa and Satyavaha or not, but at least we know Arjuna. Look at that. He keep calling Arjuna, Arjuna, Arjuna. But then he was a man of who had accomplished. The most successful person of the time. There was a value for valor, power. Most powerful person of that time and most respected person of the time. And forget about all this. Just look at this. How great he must have been that Krishna was his brother-in-law. Lord Krishna was available as brother-in-law. Sometimes the roles are reversed between brother-in-laws. Here it was other way around. Krishna kept serving this fellow, having live Krishna. I see so many people who are so obsessed. I want darshan of Ramji, I want darshan of Krishna, and I want this vision in meditation, Shiva and all that. I said, good, it is great vision to have. Should you have it, you are gifted. There's nothing wrong in it. But please know that you have to study Gita. You may have that vision of Bhagavan which is purely subjective. You only saw it. Nobody else saw. We have to trust your words. Oh, yesterday when I was looking at a sky, I saw Lord Rama. It's good. And I'm sure it must be true since it was very absorbing for you and you have been talking so ecstatically. It must be true. You might have had the vision. But then Arjuna had Krishna physically available. And like his friend, philosopher, guide, and all to an extent of servant, serving Kauravas, or with serving Pandavas. In Mahabharata, twice Krishna says, I am a servant of Yudhishthira, because you are the oldest and thereby all Pandavas. And he did it. Though in Sanskrit we glorifyingly say Krishna was a charioteer, Sarthi for Arjuna. Sarthi means driver, simple. He was nothing more than a driver, and that too on a battlefield. And he conducted himself as a driver, in spite of having Bhagavan literally at his beck and call. In spite of having all this name and fame and valor and riches and everything, Arjuna tells this, Nahi prapashyami mamapanudyat yachokamucho shanamindriyana. Avapya bhumau asapatna vruddham rajyam suranam api chadipatyam. Bhagavan, even if you make me king of the heavens and give me kingdom of all the worlds, I don't see that my fundamental problem of sense of dissatisfaction can be solved. So please teach. Then he says, Shadimam tuam prapannam shishyaste. So these great rishis felt the need of it. Okay. So Atharva taught to Angira, Angira taught to Satyavaha. And then Satyavaha taught to Angirasa. Satyavaha is a proper name. But then in those days, and even now also, there is a Namakarana Shastra. There is a samskara, Nama Vidana samskara. Among the 16 samskaras, one samskara is to give the name. There is a ritual, vidhi. And the name should be true to the person's nature, or should be something which sets a goal, inspirational role model to that person. Not the names that we like, they're good to hear, a musical names. You know, nowadays, Mittal, Sittal, Kittal, Puttal, Lakaras are so many nowadays. All senseless names. It has to have a meaning. There is a Shastra. Satyavaha, the one who does Vahanam, one who carries Satyam. That means the person always spoke truth. He was so committed to truth that he was called Satyavaha. And speaking truth means what? Very beautiful definition is that we don't have to speak truth. Stop speaking untruth. Anruta varjitam yathartha vachanam satyam. That's the definition of satyam. Free from lies, true to what it is satyam. We have not to work to speak truth. We have to work not to speak untruth. Why one speak untruth? Because of set of values. Those other values, value for money, value for power, value for name, value for pleasure, all that comfort, all these values pushes one to speak it. Even value for comfort. When you have a holiday and then something comes up, you say, yeah, I cannot come now, I am busy. And this, our WhatsApp has taught us to speak. Mobile has taught us to speak a lot of untruth, especially when somebody calls, hey, where are you? I am just on the way, reaching in 5 minutes. The fellow might be tying the laces of the shoes at home. But that's how they say, So because there is a different value. Satya means no, nothing is more valuable than truth. That's Satyavaha, Praha, and Satyavaha talked to Angirasa, Rishi Angirasa, and then Angirasa in turn told to, that continues the Vidya. See the next mantra. Third mantra. Shaunako havai mahashalaha. Shaunako havai mahashalaha. Angirasam vidivat upasanna papracha. Angirasam vidivat upasanna papracha. Kasminnu bhagavo vignate. Kasminnu bhagavo vignate. Sarvamidam vignatam bhavati. Sarvamidam vignatam bhavati. Shaunako havai mahashalaha. Angirase vidivat upasanna papracha. Shaunako havai mahashalaha. Angirase vidivat upasanna papracha. Kasmin bhagavo vignate sarvamidam vignatam bhavati. Kasmin bhagavo vignate sarvamidam vignatam bhavati. Upanishad introduces Shaunaka Rishi. Then there is an adjective about Shaunakaha. Mahashalaha Shaunakaha. Okay. Then Angirasam Papracha. The prose order is Shaunakaha Angirasam Papracha. Earlier it was said that Satyavaha taught to Angirasa. Now who taught whom? That's not order. Now he says who asked whom. So Shaunaka Rishi goes to Angirasa Rishi and asked. Then there is one adjective, Mahashalaha Shaunakaha, and there is one word, Vidhivat Upasannaha Papracha Shaunakaha. The Shaunaka who approached Vidhivat Upasanna, approached the teacher with proper injunctions, proper methodology. In other words, according to the tradition, he approached the teacher and asked. What was the question? Kasmin vignate, he Bhagavan, sarvamidam vignatam bhavati. What is it that having known which, everything as though becomes known? By knowing something, I know everything. What is that vastu? So the translation is Mahashalaha Shaunakaha approached his teacher Angirasa in a proper way, with proper attitude, and asked him, "O teacher, what is it that having known which, everything as well becomes known?" Now look at these few words called Mahashalaha and Vidhivat Upasanna. Mahashalaha means Mahashala, whose shala was big. This adjective reveals that Shaunaka was a grahasti. Mahashala means there can be Annashala, Pakashala, or can be Yagnashala. That itself reveals his qualification, his way of living. Annashala was big, meaning thereby he had not only big family, he used to feed people also. One. And Mahayagnashala means he had to have a lot of rituals being performed in his home daily. The characteristic of a grahastha, in one word, or the difference between sannyasi and grahastha is this. There is a word comes in Gita also in the 5th, 6th chapter, Niragnihi. Sannyasi is the one who is devoid of any fire. Grahasti is Sagnihi, is the one who has a fire in his home. Traditionally, when one gets married, from that day onwards, Grihastha is supposed to maintain 2 fires in the home. Okay? Dviragnihi. And these are supposedly given to a son by the father, traditionally. Every generation, they pass on these rituals, this fire. And till 10, 12 years ago, I knew somebody who had the fire in the home. They didn't know when it was lit up and by whom. It just was handed down by every generation to the generation next. Annakshetra fire, cooking, fire for cooking. Even the place where I live in Saurashtra, there was a tradition I'd seen in villages. They never extinguished the fire at home. Only on Janmashtami, they don't lit it up. On one day, Sitla Satam, they call it, that they don't light up the fire. They cover with some ashes, but there is an amber inside. And on Janmashtami, they open it and cook it. Grihastha is a one who has to have daily cooked food. The fire should be lit up at home. There should be cooked food daily. There is an exception, American husbands for this. I have to tell them. And more so when they have a working wife, or if the wife has come to India. That's an exception we have to allow in this Kali Yuga. Because there is a fire, the fire is in the oven. Indian housewives are so good. Husbands are so lucky to marry Indian ladies. She cooks for the whole month, labels them with the date, and then in the bowl she puts it, and he has to just hit up and eat. And then they say, I get a hot food. That is true. You get a hot food. Sometimes different heat comes out. You also get hot food. One day I told them, I was talking somebody that you should have 2 fires. The fellow says, we also have. I said, how come you have? I know you are living in Bombay apartment. You have that fire, Yagnashala. No, Swamiji. This fire is always on. My wife always keeps that fire on. And so Atithi, in our, just for our information, though it's not practical, but you need to know the tradition. In our culture, food was never sold, nor even the grains, nor cooked food. You should be proud of it. Because Annam Brahmeti Vijana. Annam is gross manifestation of Ishvara. Parjanyad Anna Sambhava. Yagnat Bhavati Parjanya. So gross manifestation of Ishwar Krupa is rain, and then thereby Annam. Our history, you look at the history, you open and study critically Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are our history. Never ever there is a mention that the food was sold. Up to Sanskrit literature, up to Britishers, all Sanskrit, Kalidasa and all other Kavis, their literature also never have a mention of any hotel. Food was never sold, and I have seen a couple of people I knew who just walked I'm talking of 90s, from Baroda to Bhupendra Way and all that, had gone to Dwarika. So every village they stopped, villagers came out and said, hey, where have you come from? He said, I'm a pilgrim. He said, come and take food at my home. Food was never sold. And it is papam to sell the annam. So that Mahashalaha, that means Atithis were always welcomed in his house. He was doing a lot of Annadanam, one. And Yagnashala being Mahan means he must be performing so many rituals. Performance of ritual is not simply invocation of Deva. Performance of ritual is to discover lack of sense of ownership. To possess or own something is one thing, and to have a sense of ownership is altogether different thing. At the end of every ahuti, whether it is a Gayatri or Indra or Chandra or Varuna or Brahma or Prajapati. They say this. Idam Prajapate Swaha Idanna Mama. Indraya Swaha Idanna Mama. Gayatre Swaha Idanna Mama. Ritual means symbol that you work to give up sense of ownership. Please understand what is the sense of ownership. These modern days, this corporate have policy that they give you a car to use, and after 3 years they say you can own it up also. When it is company's car, the attitude is different. When it is transferred in my name, attitude changes. That is, it is because I have a sense of ownership. Possession was with me, and possession is with me now also. So to possess something is one thing, and to have a sense of ownership is quite different thing. That is called mamakara. We'll discuss sometimes later whenever the context comes. So this, when we say mamakara is to be given up, that doesn't mean that one needs to give up all possessions literally. You may continue to possess. If you have some work and you need to address, have it. Nothing wrong in it. A thing per se, vastu per se itself is innocent. What binds and what causes the problem is sense of possession, sense of ownership. Idanna mama. That means Shaunaka was free from mamakara. Shaunaka was free from sense of ownership, and annadanam means he was given to giving. In other words, he was a contributory person, not simply consumer. He must have consumed, but his life was committed to contribution. That contributory Shaunaka, and that Shaunaka who was relatively free from sense of ownership, approached the teacher. From this mantra we see Guru Shishya Parampara. And he approached in a traditional way. The tradition methodology approach implies a proper attitude towards the teacher. And one can have a proper attitude towards the teacher only when one has proper attitude towards oneself. What is the proper attitude towards oneself? As I mentioned, the discovery, or one has to discern the problem that in spite of all achievements, I am still lacking something and I need to seek help. When I accept my limitations, when I accept that I cannot solve this problem by myself, when I accept my helplessness, then only one can surrender. Proper attitude means attitude of surrender. Surrender, it doesn't mean just falling flat and giving something money and to the teacher. No. Surrender means accepting the fact that I cannot solve this problem by myself. That problem which is centered on me, that is the problem that is with me, the self, and I'm helpless, and I seek your help. And when that person surrenders with this attitude, the person is open for thinking. Surrender is not physical. Surrender is of notions. Surrender is of wrong values. Surrender of insistences. Surrender of misconceptions, what we carry. And irony of human being is, each one feels that I am the wisest person on this earth available as of now. So sitting on the drawing room, they can comment on Biden's policies and what Trump should do and what Malaina also should do. Onwards, what Modi should do. Whereas at his home, His wife doesn't consult him whether should I cook brinjal or potatoes. She said, and if he says no, why didn't you cook? Either eat, this is what is available, then he will eat that. But the point is, every human being feels, I am Mr. Right, I am Mr. Wise, I am Mr. Experience, Mr. or Miss, whatever it is. The person feels that is to be surrendered. I can be wrong, and I think I am wrong, because the fundamental problem still persists, and I am not able to address that. Vidhivat Upasanna implies this mindset, which is a prerequisite for you can make the person sit in the lecture, but you cannot make one learn. Learning happens only when there is openness of the mind. There are no cobwebs or there are no blocks, psychological blocks, cognitive blocks, emotional blocks, philosophical blocks. All these blocks block the very teaching. Teaching doesn't mean gulping down what the teacher says, but openness to listen objectively. And having listened, openness to analyze it objectively. And having analyzed, openness to accept the drawn conclusion, drawn new wisdom, even if it is against my preconceived views and notions. That is cognitive honesty is surrender. So Vidhivat Upasanna implies that person was ready to learn. And it is mentioned in Shastras, one should teach only when the other person is ready to learn. Otherwise, it is just wasting or whiling away the time. So better don't teach. Na shishyaya, na prushtaya. One who is neither disciple nor who ask, don't teach. There's a mandate. So here, teacher immediately accepts and starts teaching this Shaunaka Rishi, because Shaunaka expressed that himself as a qualified person to learn. Vidhivat Upasanna. Now elaborate the question. Kasminnu Bhagavo Vignate in next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.